Hi everyone, it's Les Arnott here, and we're going to be having a look at editing some of the pictures that we've done at the Shutter Shack from the last shoot with two very fine models, as you can see. Well, one. Okay, so I'm in Lightroom. I'm just going to do a quick raw edit. I'm not going to go in too much detail on this part because most of it is using Photoshop to do all the work. I'm just going to do a quick develop. So on this I'm looking mainly at the histogram there, making sure that I haven't got any parts that are overexposed, which is the main part, and if I had, then we would be seeing this little triangle at the top there light up. And I'm going to bring the whites up until we actually get that to change. So you can see that peak changing there, so that means it's overexposed. So I'm going to bring the white down until we're just under. And then if we look at the detail on here, I can bring a little bit of detail back in there now by bringing down the highlights just a little bit so that I'm happy with that. Then I want a bit of shadow detail, so I'm going to bring the shadows up slightly, just a little bit, and may bring the exposure up slightly, just a tiny bit, and you can see I'm overexposed now. So again, I'm going to bring those highlights down just that little bit till I've got the detail there. So now I've basically got the perfect exposure. Now you can see in the dark areas, if I put my mouse on that triangle and you look at the picture, you can see some blue areas highlighted there. That means they are underexposed. Now I'm really not worried about that. They're going to be black, so that's not worrying me whatsoever. I could bring the blacks up just a touch. You see now we've just slightly underexposed on that, but that's more or less a perfect exposure. Having brought those up, again I'm going to bring down the highlights just a touch, just to bring some detail back into the textures. And there you can see we're looking pretty good. So I'm going to start off with a basic crop. I'm going to use the crop tool, which is located up here. And when I click on there, on the crop overlay, I'm just going to bring that down, bring this up a little bit. I'm going to come in slightly on this side. I'm making sure it's level, and to do that I'm looking at this ironing board. Not that the ironing board is level, but I don't think I need to adjust that hardly at all. So there we go. So that's just taking the mouse outside, and you can see that the cursor changes to this shape where you've got two little arrows on each end, and you can click and drag up or down to rotate it. And once I've got what I want, I'll press the enter key on the keyboard, and there we are. There's the edit. So that's just the basic raw adjustments. You see, basically I brought the highlights down a bit, we took the whites up a little bit, the exposure up slightly. So it's just balancing out. And if you follow the way that I've just done that, so I usually start with the whites and take it up till it's just clipping, then bring it back down. Take the highlights down after that, just to bring the detail back into the picture simply by looking at it, so that none of those white areas are overexposed. Bring your shadows up slightly and the exposure if you need to, and then sort out your blacks. So that's all I do in Lightroom. I don't do anything else. One thing I do not do is, in some pictures I will add a little bit of texture and sometimes a little bit of clarity, but it depends on the type of picture. I'm not going to do that in this case, not with this type of work. And also I never touch the contrast. We're going to be adding contrast in a different way in a bit in Photoshop. So all I do is the very basic raw adjustments. And then I right click and I go to edit in, and we click on Adobe Photoshop, and that will open Photoshop, open the file and load it up. It may take a little while on this PC because it's Mac, so I'm using an Apple Mac. I've got all the movie software on. I'm doing downloads at the moment, so there's a lot going on to slow me down. But eventually we'll have Photoshop up there, hopefully with the file. Still loading. That's quite a big file as well. There we go. Okay, so that's our picture. So I can see there's a few little things going on the right hand side. If I just zoom into that, it's quite hard to see, but see I've got some material down there and whatever. So first thing I do is I go to my layers, I open the layers, and on my background layer I right click on that and I duplicate the layer. That's protecting my image, so I don't touch this bottom layer at all. Everything I do is on the layers above, so we've got an exact copy there. And then what I'm going to do is to sort out these little bits first, and I'm going to do that using what's called the patch tool. Now you may have any of these tools highlighted, probably the spot healing tool. But on the spot healing tool, if you click on that, you can see the other selections, and I'm going to use what's called the patch tool. So on the patch tool, I then look at the options bar. This is the options bar going along the top there, and I make sure that the box with source on is depressed. So I click on that to make sure it's depressed, not destination. And I make sure that everything else, diffusion is on 5, that's usually standard. I'm going to leave that as it is. Now what this means is if I draw around this little area, so I'm just going to draw around this area, I'm going to be perfect. That selects that area, and I want to drag this now to an area where I want to replace that, what's within that area, with wherever I drag it to. So if I drag that to the left hand side and right click and deselect that, you can see that I've got rid of that. So I'm going to do a little bit more down here, just doing a bit at a time. Right click, deselect it, and you can see that now I'm building up, getting rid of these little areas that I want to smooth out. A little bit on the edge there. I'm not too happy with this edge. Just going to bring it in slightly. There we go. So that's looking okay now. There's a few little sequins and things on the floor from last model's waistcoat and underpants. I won't go in any more detail. Okay, so some of these textures here. Now where you've got to be careful is you can see the leg of the ironing board there. I don't want to get close to that, because if you do, you'll start blurring the edges of any object. So anywhere you've got objects such as the lady's dress or anywhere like that, you don't want to be getting too close to those areas, because you'll cause smudging. So you'll see some main creases here. I'm just drawing around, dragging around. Okay, so that's my first process. There's a few little areas there. I'm not going to worry too much about those. We'll sort those out later. Okay, so there's my first edit. Now I'm really happy with that. So what I'm going to do before I go any further, I'm going to merge these layers down. So I'm going to go back to my layers. I'm going to right click on the top layer and merge it down. And the reason I'm doing this is because I've got quite a lot of memory. This is quite an old machine actually, but it's got a fair bit of memory and it's fairly powerful. But if you've got an older PC, we're trying to keep the layers down to a minimum, but we can't get rid of things, you know, we still need that protection. So I'm still going to duplicate this one. So I'm still back to 2 layers, but I'm back to 2 layers where I know, you know, I've done some edits to those layers, and I'm happy with those. So every now and then, if you've got an older computer, it's worth just merging your layers down. When you're happy, don't do that before. Make sure that you're happy with the image. Okay, so we're just doing basic corrections on this part. Now we can do a little bit of what's called dodging and burning, which we'll do later. But the first thing I want to have a look at is this dress. If we look at this dress down there, we've got this And I just don't like that fold in the material there. So here's an easy way. And I'm zoomed in now, and here's a little tip. If you put your finger down on the space bar and while you're holding the mouse, and you keep the space bar down, it will change to the hand tool, and that will mean you can just move this around. And when you let go, it goes back to the tool, whichever tool that you're using. Okay, so if we look at now, we're on this layer. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to select the standard lasso tool, and I'm going to make sure that on the options bar I'm on the second selection there, add to selection. Could be on the first one, but I usually use the second one because I'm usually adding, unless I want to take a bit away, and then I can use the next one, but we'll go into that if we need to. Now what I'm going to do is to select an area of this belt, and I'm going to draw. I mean, draw freehand. Now you haven't got to be perfect with this, but just don't need to go outside. So it's something like this around this area, and I'm going to copy that and go to Edit, Copy, and then straight back to Edit, Paste. So now what we have got, if we look at the layers, is we have got just that little bit of material on this layer. There's nothing else on there. And you probably can't tell whatsoever because it still looks the same. It's put it back where it was. So if I just click on the Move tool now, which is on the top left there, you will see if you've got this Show Transform Controls ticked, which you want that, and also make sure that you haven't got Auto Select ticked. Make sure that's not selected, but you've got that, and you can see this bounding box. What I can do now is move this down to a position where I'm getting rid of that fold. Now, it may not line up perfectly, so what I'm now going to do is I'm going to hold down Command on the Mac, and on Windows it's the Control key. If you hold one of those down and you go to the corners, you can see you get these lines come up, and this means I'm in transform mode, and I can just go to the corners and just bring these and distort it slightly so that it fits and lines up perfectly. Now once you've done that, you need to click the tick on the options bar, and then if we just click on one of the other tools, let's go to the one below, you can now see that we've covered that up, and it looks just looks better, doesn't it? Okay, so now I'm happy with that. I'm going to right click on that layer and merge it down. That just merges it down to the layer that's below it. So now we've got this version, and the one below is the original, which looks like that. Okay, so that looks a lot better. We've sorted that little problem out. We've still got a few little sequins there, and while I'm here now, I'm just going to click back. I'm going to use the spot healing brush, and I'm just going to click on these areas. Make the brush a bit smaller, and to make the brush smaller, you can use a slider at the top to change the size of the brush. I'm using the parenthesis keys, the bracket keys, or the square bracket keys to the left of the enter key. And if you press the one on the left, it makes it smaller, one on the right makes it larger, and then you can just paint out these little areas using the spot healing tool. So it's just a click and then let go, and we'll just tidy that up over here. I can hold down the space bar again, that's handy, and we can just single clicks on these little white spots there. Bits of dust and sequins and whatever that shouldn't be there, hair, couldn't be mine, not guilty. Okay, we've got a light area there, and we'll put that right later on. Okay, so there we go, that's good enough. Double click on the hand tool, and that just makes it fit the screen. So there's another tip there. Double click on the magnifying glass, it goes to 100%. Double click on the hand tool again, we go back. So we can use that for zooming in and out to look at the whole picture. Okay, now we're going to look at, there's various techniques. Now I've done videos before where I use the lasso tool quite a lot, but I'm going to use a different technique on this one. I'm going to use what I call 50% grey layers to dodge and burn. And to dodge and burn is to lighten something, which is to dodge something. To burn something is to make it darker. So it may be, everybody knows I've got a shiny helmet, so it may be I just want to dampen that down a little bit, or, you know, bring out areas where I've got too much shadow or whatever. So to do that, we create a new layer. Now there are different ways of doing this, but I'm going to do it this way because it's a way that most people will find easiest probably. So I've created that new layer, and what I'm going to do on there now is to go to Edit and then go to Fill, and you get different contents there. It says Contents, Foreground Colour. You've got all these different options, and we want 50% grey. Click on OK, click that, and we get that. Now 50% grey is just that, it's straight in between black and white, which means if we put a different layer mode on this, so you can see it's on normal at the moment, so that's where your layer modes are, and if I click on that and click on soft light, basically the picture doesn't change, it looks exactly the same. So that grey now, with this layer mode on, is basically keeping the image exactly the same. But what we can do with this is we can paint on it, and I'm just going to double click where it says layer 1, and I'm going to click burn on this. So on this layer, press the enter key. On this layer I'm going to darken areas. So to darken areas, all I need is a black brush. So I go to my brush tool, make sure I've got a soft brush. So soft round on the general brushes. Click out of there. And again, we can resize the brush using those keys, just like we did before. And I'm going to change the opacity. If we look at the options bar, on the opacity, I'm going to take the opacity down quite low. Let's go to about 16%, something like that. And what that will mean is it won't be so harsh. It will be a slight change rather than you know, if we got it to 100%, it would darken it quite a lot. So I'm just going to make my brush a bit smaller, and I'm just going to paint over these areas. So when I go over it a couple of times, obviously if I go over it twice and it's on 16%, it's then going to be 32% and so on. So I can darken these areas. So I'm keeping the mouse down on this area. Darken this down a little bit. So I'm clicking twice now, keeping the mouse down, just going over that. Where else have we got? Just click a little bit on the hand, darken the hand a little bit. Any other areas? It's a little bit bright here, so I'm just going to go over this area. So I'm just clicking and painting. You can see it's just very slight, it's just darkening it a little bit. Probably on the chest there, Neve's chest. Darken this area. Okay, so that's probably, don't forget my shiny helmet, there we go. Just bring that down a little bit. Now I could get rid of that highlight altogether, but don't want to do that. The way I would do that is to actually go to this background layer. And again, we'll use the patch tool, and I'll just go over this area and just drag that to the right. Let go, deselect, and you can see that's just dampen that down a little bit, which is fine. We want a bit of there, we want a little bit. This one on the back actually, it's because we're using two lights, so I'll take that down as well. Select, and maybe just darken that a bit. So I'll go back to my burn layer, making sure I've got a black brush again. And we'll just darken that down a little bit. So it looks like we've got a single light rather than two lights. So that's how you can tell when you've got two lights, when you've got two highlights. Although that was bouncing off the ceiling, so it was quite soft. And this is a harder light coming from the right hand side. Okay, so that's burn layer. Now what I'm going to do now is to create another new layer. And we'll call this dodge. So I double clicked on there, type in dodge. And this is where we're going to lighten areas. And again, we need to fill that in. So we go to edit, fill, 50% grey. We change the layer mode to soft light. And we use a white brush. So if you click on the default brushes, if you click there, it goes to the default brushes. And if I click there and swap that around, so I've got white on the top. And now what we can do, we've still got the 16% on there. If we want to bring, I might actually take that up a bit on this. So I'm going to go for about 50%. And I'm just going to bring this in. Now that is way too bright, yeah, but don't worry about that. You'll see what I'm going to do in a moment. But it just helps me see where I'm brushing. So I'm just going to bring up these areas a bit. And I'm doing this quite fast. You could take your time a little bit. Don't want to bring too much under here because that would be quite shaded. Okay, now I'm going to use black on this and just go over that area there. So I can swap brushes to darken. Okay, so that's much too bright. What I do now, I go back to the layers and I can take the opacity. So I'll click there and I'll drag this down a little bit until I just get, you can see I go all the way down to the original, or I'll just bring a little bit in. So I'm just going to bring a little bit in on that one. And you can create as many of these as you want. It's quite a good idea to use quite a few layers because you might want to get different opacities on different ones rather than trying to do it all on one layer, which you can do. But if you go wrong, you can't, you know, if you try and use the opacities and that, it's going to affect everything. So having them on separate layers is quite handy. Maybe this area, we'll just bring a little bit more. I actually want white, not black. Just bring a little bit more detail into this. And maybe just emphasize these legs a little bit more. There we go. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that now. We've got this area here on the black there that looks quite bright. So I'm going to go back to my burn layer on that and use a black brush. And just paint over that to darken these areas at the bottom here. On the background. And usually I like it fairly dark. Now remember I've got the brush on a different opacity on this, so I've got to be a little bit careful. Okay, and we'll just dampen that cable down at the end. And I want to bring, I'm going to change the brush to white on that and just bring this bit back in. I'm really doing that on the longer layer. Should be on the dodge layer, but I'm fairly happy with that. Okay. Probably gone a bit too bright there. I'm just going to undo that actually. I'll go to Command Z a couple of times and undo that bit that I just done, and I need to be on the dodge layer and just bring it on the dodge layer a little bit. I should have swapped over my layers. That's why I'm such a bad teacher. There we go. Okay, so you could spend a lot more time than I have getting it perfect. That doesn't look too bad to me. That's fine. May bring in just a little bit more detail there. Bring that in just a touch. Okay, so I'm happy now. And what I'm going to do with this is just flatten the image now. I'm going to right click on any one of the layers and flatten the image, and that will create one layer. Having done that, I'm going to duplicate that layer again, because I'm going to do more work. I'm trying to keep the layers down. And if you do struggle, if you have got an older PC and you are really struggling, it'd be a good idea, first of all, to resize the image to something that you're going to use it for. So if you're going to put it on the net, you know, you've got a full-sized, this is off a 30 megabyte processor, 30 megabyte sensor, so it's quite a big file. So you could resize the image. You could probably make it, you know, so 4,000 pixels to the widest edge, whichever side's the widest, whether you've got portrait or landscape orientation. Do it to about 400. That's plenty big enough for good sized prints or whatever. It could be even smaller if you're using it for the net. But that's keeping it a reasonable size, just making it a bit smaller to make it a bit more manageable on your PC if it's older. And if it's still struggling, make it even smaller. As I say, if you're just mainly doing things on the net or digital competitions, you don't need it that big. Okay, so we are now at that stage where we've done our basic edits, and that looks good enough to use actually. So at that stage, I'm going to finish this video, but we are going to go into another video and do a bit more editing from this point.